You're 9 years old. The bell rings.
I am? Oh, okay.
No,
we're doing the story thing.
The
Okay.
listener, man.
Okay.
It's about the listener. Where's the marijuana? Bring in the marijuana. All right.
Bring in the marijuana.
Bring in the marijuana.
He smokes, if you can't tell.
Yes, I'm a big
But-
potty.
He said potty!
I'll never forget Bill O'Reilly, where he's like,
Jesus.
and you're getting all potted up on weed. And I was like, that's going to be me someday. Welcome to Libtards and Shy. Here, we discuss liberalism and what's stopping its progress, all while drinking way too much Arabic tea, which is called Shy. So, come on in.
All right.
9 years old.
I'm 9 years old.
The bell rings. You put on your hard hat. And the cart comes in on the tract, and you step in the cart, and that cart is pushed in deeper and deeper into a mine.
What kind of school is this?
A school?
Yeah. It's a weird
Motherfucker,
school.
you work in a mine.
I'm not taking classes or anything. It's just mine.
This is an ITT Technical
It's
Institute
just
for 9-year-olds. You're a 9-year-old, and you're being pushed into this cart, and you're going to work.
In a mine.
In a mine.
Okay.
And this isn't in some random fantasy world on a different planet. This isn't in some third world country that you think is run down.
Canada, but okay.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Or France. You know.
Hey. Fuck you, France.
This is taking place in the 1870s to the 1890s.
I see where you're going with this. I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit.
The average American in the 1890s worked a 100-hour work week.
God damn.
They worked every weekend.
Yeah.
They made pennies.
What is that, like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, something like that? No, that still isn't that a 100-hour work week?
No, it's literally like...
That's like 16-hour days.
It's something like that.
Jesus.
There is no concept of a weekend.
That's like 6 to 8 hours of sleep and then work the rest of the time.
Right. So you want to ask yourself a question. Are you a 9-year-old working in a mine? Does your child work in the fields as an 8-year-old? Do you have missing limbs from working in a meatpacking industry and getting no compensation? Do you have a weekend? Do you have minimum wage, overtime, workman's comp? Do you have any semblance of a salary that increases over time? Well, if the answer is yes, you owe every single one of those things to unions. Yeah. Hopefully that snapping doesn't destroy the microphone.
Oh, yeah. Fuck.
We'll find out. But
I did it far away. We're fine.
we're good.
You know what's crazy? How privileged we are now? The phrase minimum wage comes across as a bad thing.
Oh, yeah.
There was once a time where like that was something they had to fight for.
Right. And when we say fight, we don't mean like... And nothing against people with, picket signs marching. But
No.
they were fighting.
Oh, no. There's literal violence.
Like actual violence and murder and fighting in the streets against police and militiamen who are hired by companies to kill you for protesting.
It's kind of a similar thing with the vaccines where like we kind of take it for granted so long how effective these shits are
Right.
that we don't understand how bad it once was.
Right. Well, nobody wakes up in the morning and tweets, I wasn't polished off by polio today.
Yeah.
It's, or, hey, did you ever hear about smallpox and how it killed my friend? Because it doesn't exist anymore.
No one's going to be like, well, the polio vaccine gives you a runny nose for a while. It's like, yeah, but then you don't die of polio.
Right. I mean, Bill Burr talked about how, like, scientists recently, what's it called, developed a vaccine for HPV. And how, like, they criticize these people when they should, in fact, be, like, we should be throwing parades for these people. Anyways,
Doctors?
Yeah.
Some of them.
Some of them.
Some of them. But no, it's the same thing with unions.
No, 1,000%.
There was once a time where there was a 100-hour work week. My finger would get sliced off, and we just throw that shit in your sausage, and then I'd have to come back the next day. Right. And I'd have to bring my 9-year-old with me.
Right. And, you're mentioning The Jungle, and you're mentioning Upton Sinclair's work. And it's funny that he purposely wrote that book. Upton Sinclair is a man.
Is it? Bullshit.
You're thinking of The History of Standard Oil by Ida Tarbell. Upton Sinclair is a man.
Fuck me, you're right.
It's a man.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. When I was in like AP US history, way back when the dinosaurs walked the earth.
Sinclair's that's a feminine ass name.
It is a feminine ass name, but it's a last name.
Nah.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I thought Upton Sinclair was a woman.
No, I was just wrong. Don't baby me. It's fine.
As you can tell, this is very well researched.
Yes.
It actually really is, but
not butthurt at all. Anyways, continue.
There is something about unions that we need to talk about, which is that before the rise of unionization in the 1890s and onward, basically employers had unlimited power, and they could easily fire you or mistreat you or sexually assault you. And then when you complained or you were late or you didn't want to work 100 hours a week,
they just replace you with a different Irish or Polish dude.
Exactly. And these plants and these factories would purposely target immigrants and people of color to exploit their labor.
And in the 1870s, it was like Polish, Lithuanians, Baltic people, even some Irish.
Yeah. It's funny how like the definition of white changes, but yeah, they were not considered white at that time.
What's her name? Isabel Wilkerson?
Right. Talks
the
about
caste thing.
Like, yeah, the change of the
how
caste.
they had to like abandon their own things to become white. Like they had to adopt whiteness in order to survive.
Right.
So they had to abandon the Polishness.
It was at a time in America where the idea of universal public education, something else we take for granted, is
something that we complain about, to be honest with you.
right, and something that conservatives try to defund, dismantle, and sell off for parts.
And some of the Democrats, just kind of stab a hole in and take money out of.
Oh yeah,
they're all shitty.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about a society at that time where child labor was incredibly common. And when I say child, I mean like 9-year-olds who were working in factories, losing thumbs and fingers, not being in school.
Children.
Like breathing poisonous air.
Like Charlie's balls haven't dropped yet.
Right. And there are photos of those online, and they look like their faces are all like, full of coal. And no, they're not, playing coal ball fights. They're actually working in a coal mine.
Yeah, that's not a Dickens novel.
Right. And so we like to think that, society naturally progressed and came to the realization that, these labor practices are bad. And then these companies graciously and kindly gave up their power and started paying people minimum wage and started giving people the weekend and started bringing down the working hour.
No.
And the
not at all.
Not at all.
No.
In fact,
they fought, bled, and died in the street for it.
Goddamn right. If you ever talk to yourself and said, I need to reorient my life and I need to focus on work-life balance. That was never a fucking concept.
That wasn't a thing.
That wasn't even a thing.
It wasn't a thing.
Until progressives.
No, it was work was life.
Right.
Very different three words phrases.
Now, before we go into specifically what unions are, there is also a dichotomy that we should understand about the first wave of the labor movement, which is that it is not perfect. The labor movement protected jobs that were predominantly male and white. And that's
because most of the jobs that were being fought for were occupied by male and white
exactly.
people.
And so as we go through this 3-part series about unions, we are going to talk about its history. We're going to talk about what life was like before unionization, the struggles they had to go through in order to gain legitimacy and legal status, and then, of course, how certain people were cut out of these factors. But for those of you who don't know, we're going to go into specifically what a union is. Because if you've ever heard the term striking and how, the longshoremen are going to go on strike, the railroad workers are going to go on strike, Amazon workers are going to go on strike. That concept of going on strike used to be illegal. Against the law.
It's, okay, here's how crazy labor laws in the U.S. still are. The president can bust a strike at any time.
Right.
Today.
Oh, yeah, we saw it with Biden.
It's something that they can preserve. And no, I'm not even talking about, let's push a bill through Congress. Like, he can, wink, wink, foreshadowing, deploy the National Guard if he's so wink.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's never happened before.
We
just celebrate Labor Day for fun.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. We just thought of it out of a vacuum.
Yes.
Kind of like we thought of a minimum wage in the 8-day work week. In the 8-day work day. 8-hour work day. Fuck me. That took a minute.
It's important to understand that the companies did not give this up. That they did not voluntarily do this. That they fought tooth and nail and hired actual muscle to hurt and kill people who organized. That we fought with life and limb to earn these rights and that they can be taken away.
Yeah.
You and your child don't work in a coal mine for 100 hours a week with no weekends and no minimum wage, not because nature got better or companies became nice, but because we made it fucking illegal. And if they had the opportunity, they would throw your ass back in the mine if they could.
100%. And they're going to use different tactics now because it's not as archaic as it was in the 1870s, but the fuckery is the same. Fuckery is the term we're going to use whenever a company or a corporation or a business, whatever the fuck you want to call it, tries to bust up a union. Or stop unionization.
The term is union busting, but we're going to call it
fuckery.
Fuckery. Before we know about busting unions or how unions are formed, I want to, let's go over specifically for the audience, what is a union?
So a union is essentially, in its core, a collective of workers who have organized to act as one entity to negotiate with their employer.
Right.
The way it usually works is you have a certain industry, let's say the railroad workers. All the workers have certain grievances. Maybe they want certain better working conditions, higher wages, whatever their grievances may be. They will come together and they will collectively bargain. Usually through an
Now, why are they coming together collectively? Why don't they figure out their grievances individually with their employer?
And address them one by one?
Yeah.
Because why
don't they pull themselves up by their bootstrap?
Exactly.
Right.
You don't have any power one-on-one against a rail corporation.
So one guy
Amazon.
Alone with a rail corporation,
and
power.
This is something that we really want to point out. It is the inherent contradiction in capitalism, which is a corporation wants as much output for as little cost as possible. Labor happens to be one of the largest costs of running any business. Anyone who owns a small business will attest to that. The number I want to say that most small businesses or most businesses in general try to keep is 25 to 30% of your gross profits. That's a big fucking chunk of your profits.
Oh, yeah.
The worker, on the other hand, is trying to do as little work for as most money as possible. Anyone who's ever worked an hourly job or even a fucking salary job knows the same thing. You get paid the same amount, no matter how busy it is at the restaurant. You get paid the same salary, no matter how many kids you teach.
Now, it's important to understand that when we say everyone, there's going to be someone in the audience who says, well, I work really hard at my job, and that's fine. But we're talking not about individuals and their psychological choices. We're talking about massive systems with millions of people and what the incentive structure orients towards. So a company, no matter how nice it is, you can go from the Monsanto to the In-N-Out, it still benefits financially. And it's structured to benefit financially from reducing costs and increasing profit. And if labor is the biggest cost by bulk in most industries, then the number one way to ensure profits
is to cut labor.
Now.
Every time the economy gets bad, what do? They lay people off.
Right.
If they can't lay people off, what do? They cut back on overtime.
Exactly. So in a union, in a one-on-one situation, they have very, very low power against an employer. And what historically has occurred, especially in the Gilded Age, is you complain, you get fired, you get replaced. There's a bunch of poor people outside the factory who would kill for that pennies on the dollar job. So this was illegal at the time. They come together and they start to bargain collectively as a single unit. A lot of misconceptions about this, which is that, these, you guys who wanted unions were a bunch of wimpy, limp-dick commies.
Hell no.
But in fact, these were like Giga Chad men.
They were all whip your ass, dude.
Right. These are like hardcore blue-collar men who had to fight and die in the street for that. And so a collective bargain is when a group of workers come together to negotiate terms and conditions of employment with the employer. They will form a union, which again, in the 1890s was against the law. They will come together to form an organization, and this organization will represent the workers. These workers are called the rank and file. And then they will have elections. So it's a democratic entity that will elect union officials who will be the leading negotiators.
The liaison, the intermediaries between the rank and file and the corporation.
In the corporation, exactly. And so there has been a culmination of riot after riot. The Hayward, what's it called? I believe it's called the Haymarket Riot in Chicago. That was in the 1880s.
Pullman.
The Pullman strike was in the 1890s. It was so violent. The government's response was so violent that President Grover Cleveland pulled in the National Guard.
Keyword government response Co-violent.
Right.
So violent.
So this is the government that's supposed to protect the rights of American citizens, stepping in on the behalf of capital to shut down the labor movement, which again was illegal at the time.
If you want a comparable contemporary example, think of like a Black Lives Matter riot, where they are angry and loud and probably annoying to some people.
Right.
But
and
they're not. But they're
sometimes
not.
we'll deploy certain forms of violence.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that does not.
But when the
remove
cops come, it
fact-
gets more violent.
Right. And it does not remove the fact that these people are angry for a reason. It is signaling the Pullman strike of 1894 is the main catalyst that even the government will not support unionization, will not support labor reform, and that it is up to the working class.
Yeah, because the Wagner Act didn't happen until 34.
Right.
35.
And so union memberships
been like
rise.
30 years.
The AFL-CIO is formed. Steel workers, railroad workers, longshoremen, all kinds of jobs start to unionize, and they start to literally fight in the street and negotiate and protest and go on strike, all of which was illegal. And they finally culminated in the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act is of 1937? 35, which is also called the National Labor Board Act, something like that. It basically created the National Labor Board.
Yeah.
So the way that works is that when a organization, a company, when its employers want to unionize, they will basically pass out cards.
There's a 3-step process. First process is they literally pass out cards. Like you said, index cards essentially. You fill that shit out, and then you
Need to meet a 30% threshold.
30% thresholds or whatever the workforce is, file that with the National Labor Board. If you get the 30% threshold, then you schedule an election. If you pass, and by election we mean vote to unionize or to not unionize. If you vote to unionize, the next step is to come to an agreement with your employer. That's the 3-step process to actually forming a union.
Now, it's important to understand, I want to do a quick review. In the 1890s and before, child labor was ubiquitous. Incredible long weeks were the norm. You got paid virtually nothing. The conditions were awful. And rioting is what they called it. Going on strike,
Right.
unionization, organizing, collective bargaining was seen as a criminal
Rioting.
element.
Looting.
It was seen as a criminal element by the government and by corporations. And it is important to understand that 40 years from the 1890s to the 1930s and the Depression culminated in the creation of the Wagner Act, which is what these 3 rules that we just went over are. The rules that we just went over.
Well, the act allowed the process, but those are the 3 steps to creating a union.
Right, but the passage of the Wagner Act is what finally even made having a union
Possible,
legal.
yeah.
It made it recognized under the law that going on strike became a legal
More
tool.
importantly, it made it illegal for corporations to have unfair labor practices.
Exactly. And this is a major step that also led to the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is responsible for the 8-hour a day, the 40-hour work week, minimum wage, overtime.
Yeah.
All of these things that you just think are a part of nature, like trees and grass, was actually things that people fought for. And I cannot emphasize enough that they literally fought for it. So we have a union. It's led by its officials who are democratically elected by its members, who are called the rank and file. They, in order to have become a union, needed to gain 30% of the workers in the company to get an election.
That's just to get an election.
That's just to get an election. That's recognized by the National Labor Board. Then if they win a majority, the National Labor Board recognizes them. And then by the time of the Wagner Act, what occurs is they are now recognized. They are now required by law to come to an agreement. Now, we haven't talked about Taft-Hartley and the response to that. That will be in part 2. But in this episode, we want to talk about specifically what were the rules for unions and striking on the books right now. So, to start this off, the Wagner Act legitimized unions, it legitimized striking. What did it do when it came to restricting company policies that were seen as anti-labor practices? So with regards to like speech.
So it limited corporations and what they can actually do. And
So what does that mean what does it mean that something is anti-labor practices?
One of the main, they have to have a neutral opinion on unions. That's a huge thing.
And they obviously don't.
So let's say I'm a corporation and you're the workers and you want to unionize. And you say, hey, we're thinking about unionizing, but we haven't. Or you catch whiffs that
your employees are
unionizing. You see those little yellow cards getting passed around. You can't do shit legally because of the Wagner Act. You have to have a neutral opinion.
So before that, how did it go?
Before that, if I catch one person, you fire that person. 2, 3 people, maybe you fire all them too.
So basically,
if not, you can. There's other ways and discriminatory things.
So the Wagner Act, basically, you're saying created a requirement that
something that the Wagner Act did it incredibly well is it made workers a protected class against corporations.
Because the thing that's interesting to me is that what we kind of don't realize is that here's the question I have for you.
Mm-hmm.
This law that basically treated workers as a protected class and restricted the union busting practices of corporations. What did that lead to? What did that lead to in sense of like economic output? So did it stifle growth? Did it bring down GDP?
No, not at all.
So what happened?
It created the American middle class. It single-handedly created the American middle class.
Okay, so when you say
the image of the mom, the dad, the 2 kids, the white picket fence, the car,
the little dog
with a little dog.
When you say it created the middle class, so the way I'm interpreting this, the way I see this is that because in America we feel like when we look back at the 50s, which is the image that you're representing, right? When we look back at the 50s, we look at a time of segregation, but we ignore the massive socialist policies that were enacted at the time. So what's interesting here is that like
limited social policies for a particular group of people,
for white people,
yes,
and particularly white men. But there is something interesting here, which is that we have this conception in America, which is that it's because we worked hard, we won World War II, we defeated the Nazis, that capitalism naturally produces the middle class.
No, it's the opposite. Capitalism does not naturally produce a middle class.
So what is capitalism good at? What does it do?
It's good at innovation. It's good at making a shit ton of money. Those are the 2 main things capitalism is good at.
And at the expense of anything?
When you have the laborers, at expense of the laborers.
Okay.
Because you have essentially 2 parties. You have corporations and you have laborers. Those are the 2 entities need to come together to create an economy, essentially.
Right. You need capital and labor.
Capital and labor,
right.
Goods and services, products, etc. So when you have 2 things fighting like that, one's going to win. And because the corporations usually have all the capital and pay out the wages, unchecked, they usually win.
So what's interesting here, though, is that in the sense of an economy, there's 2 components, which is capital and labor. But there is a third component, too, that needs to be taken into account. Government. And I think what the Wagner Act really did is that it legitimized
government.
It legitimized like labor as a entity, as an institution. And so we look back at this time and we see to ourselves that this system of unionization, it actually didn't just increase wages. It didn't just create the minimum wage. No. It didn't just give you the weekend. It didn't just end child labor. It didn't just restrict companies from using violence and union busting practices. It created the American middle class. It raised wages. It gave people the ability to buy housing, to be able to politically represent themselves with the disposable income that they generated.
If you're packing meat for $1 a day, you don't have disposable income.
Right. I mean, forget income. You have no time. You have no time.
Just time.
Like you barely can sleep.
Turns out when people don't have free time, they spend money.
Right.
And they do fun shit.
Exactly. I mean, this is something that like was so obvious to us but it was a shocking concept at the time. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt talked about this. She says, "What is the point of having the most dynamic market if no one can afford to participate in it?"
Exactly.
Right. And so you have
Eleanor with the bars. Let's go,
dude. Eleanor with the bars. Seriously. I mean, in hindsight, to me, this series is going to follow 3 steps. We're talking about what is a union, what was life before it, and what are the benefits that it created. In the next part, we're going to be talking about how unions got busted, how the Wagner Act got restricted.
Original practices of union busting, middle practices of union busting that we're still facing today.
Right.
In around the 60s, early 70s, 80s. Thank you again, Reagan.
Fucking Reagan.
All roads lead back to Reagan.
Right.
In some way degree.
And then it's going to be, the third part will be about basically what is the current day, the second wave of labor look like? Because I think what's important here, the whole point of this episode, the thesis of this episode is that if you're a 9-year-old and you're alive today, you are by law required to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot be hired for a job or your labor exploited or sent into the mine.
No.
And if you are an adult today and you work, you have minimum wage and you have some protections. I mean, these are such basic
It's things that we take for granted, but it's like
for granted.
you're entitled to a 10-minute work break for every 4-hour shift.
Right.
You're entitled for a 30-minute meal break.
Oh, yeah.
It's unpaid, but
Right.
you have to have it.
And I'm not saying
legally.
I'm
If
not
you
saying
work
these
over
labor
8 hours,
practices
you
are-
get time and a half, no matter what the industry is and how
Right.
cheap they are.
Companies never gave up this power. They never volunteered it. It was taken away from them because labor organized. People organized. People got political. Some people like to say, oh, I'm not really that political. I just want to work hard. I'm just going to work hard and take care of me. But that's not how it works.
You can't.
You are more likely to raise the value and your income and your standard of living through political change than through personal hard work and
Anything
grit.
else.
And that's not to say that hard work and grit is something that's bad or should be despised or that people shouldn't be working hard. That is not the point.
No, but in a vacuum, it won't do shit.
Exactly.
This is what all the red pill bros are talking about. This is the only decent thing they ever say. Where this is called being trapped in the matrix. I'm
Exactly.
using your dumb fucking language, but this is what it is. Or trapped in the rat race. If you've ever read Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Right. I mean, there is this concept of we think that we can just outwork systematic forces, but you can't. You're not that special.
No.
And we either thrive together, as white men in the 50s did with their families,
Yeah.
or we die together, as we're dying now.
Who's the last waiter you saw that made it fucking big just by waiting tables?
Right.
They can't.
It's
It's impossible.
Right.
Every time they get out is because, they got a degree, they got another job, something else. They had another talent,
Even these
or they got an education.
But even these degree jobs are paying less and less because
Yeah.
their salaries aren't going up. But inflation is killing the market.
Well, unionization's going down.
Exactly. Right.
I wonder if there's another quitting.
It's as unionization goes up,
Wealth inequality grows.
Right. Goes down as unionization goes up, and when unionization goes down, wealth inequality grows. They're inversely proportional.
Yes.
So, in conclusion, it is important to recognize that whether it's today or any time in the future, if you are living in a quote-unquote wave, that is not a real thing. Politics is not a natural ebb and flow. Things can get a lot worse.
Very
Things
quickly.
can get a lot better.
Very quickly.
But politics is a human invention. And just as it is a human invention that can turn things awfully, people can also, through political action, make things better.
What's the thing you always say? Politics is the only game that you lose if you stop playing.
Exactly. It's an infinite game. Right? It's an infinite game, and the only way to lose is if you stop playing. And this is really what it is. Every labor right you have, and we'll talk about in the future episode about how a lot of these labor rights that we're talking about in the Wagner Act don't exist anymore. They're gone. But every labor right you have...
They're still there. They've been undercut.
They're there. They're undercut. I mean, right to work laws have undercut that. But it's like every labor right that you have was something that was fought for, that was made. Collective action made these things real. And collective complacency undid these things. And it is only collective action, again, that will bring these things back to life and more and be more inclusive. And that's all the time we have. This has been Libtards and Shy with Max and Monsoor. Join us again next week for an all-new episode, and please remember to like and subscribe on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Wherever you are and whenever you are, have a good morning, good evening, or good night. What?
Don't wait around till after the credits. There's nothing weird there. How many dead babies does it take to paint a room?
Don't say as much as it takes.
It depends on how hard you throw them.
Oh no. Oh God.